Good evening, everyone. So we are about to welcome Cormac Doyle to the stage. He is a driven project leader with over 15 years of business operations, analytics, and project management experience from international multinational firms like FBL, Yahoo, Verizon, and Nonce Communications. While he is originally from Ireland, Cormac has lived in and led major projects in the US, Europe, Asia, and the South Pacific. All of these were done by leading top performing virtual teams. Please welcome Cormac Doyle. Cormac.
Thanks a lot, Carola. And afternoon, everybody. Just give me a minute to share my screen. So afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's doing great. I know I'm Cormac Doyle, as Carola mentioned. I feel like I've been given the graveyard shift here, as it's nearly 3:30 on Friday. So I hope everybody has lots of energy. I have some interesting tips to share with everyone today on virtual teams. As Carola mentioned, I've worked in international firms and all around the world for over 15 years now, and I would like to share some of the main tips and three of the key successful keys that I've used to engage virtual teams and get really good results out of that. And I will start that off by saying that has been through complete learnings and failures and errors and trials. So hopefully I can pass on some of those to you folks, because I know basically everybody is working with virtual teams today, and it may be normal for some of you and it may be new to some of you as well, but we're all there. But yeah, I would suggest everybody, if it's 3:30 and you're lagging and if you've been like me today, checking emails, dipping in and out of the conference, chasing 2-year-olds around, trying to get your pregnant wife lunch, stand up and just stretch a little bit, jump around a little bit, do whatever you can, completely optional. But if you can change your state and if we can focus in for like the next 30-40 minutes, hopefully I will give you guys a few nuggets of things to think about in just getting better engaged virtual teams. So what I am going to walk through today is, as I mentioned, virtual teams are here to stay. And I think everybody's aware over the last few decades, virtual teams were creeping up. If you work in global companies, or even if you work in national companies, you're probably working virtually. With the COVID pandemic, virtual teams, everybody is based. I don't think there's I actually wanted to prompt and ask, is there anybody on this call that is not working in a virtual team right now? I don't know if I can see the chats coming through, but I think basically everybody is working in the virtual team right now. So what we will go through today is 3 keys for success. That is keeping team members motivated, engaged. Number 2 is understanding differences and preferences and respecting those and being open to them. And the third one is being interactive and adaptable. So that's what I'll go through. I will start by giving a quick introduction of myself. Then I'll go through some interactive slides. I'll have a lot of questions for you guys to get your feedback and make it as interactive as possible. So if you can get in the chat and keep on interacting that way, that would be much appreciated. And then we'll probably have time at the end to get back to the tables and break out into discussions and see if you took any learnings out of this and things that you can bring back and start applying from next Monday with your virtual teams. So just to start off with a little bit of my background, I grew, if nobody can tell from the accent, I grew up in Ireland. I never had a strong Irish accent. A lot of people in the US say, you can't be from Ireland, I can understand what you're saying. So, but this is actually the accent I grew up with. And yeah, I won't take Boston as an insult. I will take that. But I grew up in Ireland. I grew up in a small little farming town of maybe 1,000 people. I think there was 1,000 people and 5,000 sheep, so we were seriously outnumbered by sheep. But I grew up in a part of Ireland in the southeast called Wicklow, about an hour and a half southeast of Dublin. And even from a young age, I was big into organizing projects, getting stuff done. So that was always in my DNA. But I also had a sense of adventure. So I always wanted to get out and see the world. The minute I was 16 or 17, I moved up to the biggest city in Ireland and started doing college there. Once I got out of college, I got a job, but then I wanted to go and see the world. So I actually, through LinkedIn, randomly, I got approached by somebody saying my first opportunity was to go and work in Tahiti. And since then, opportunities have just opened. So I worked for large companies as in Deloitte, Yahoo, Verizon. I was in Tahiti, I was in Papua New Guinea, Taiwan, India, stints in Brazil. I think I have finally settled down, and you can see a photo of my family in the slide. They definitely think I've settled down, so they're not willing to travel like me, but my wife and my 2 sons, and we've got a third on the way next April. And that just gives you a bit of flavor of me. I did want to, as a part of a fun thing I know we've got 38 people on, but I wanted to ask you guys seeing that everybody is pretty much working remotely these days, if you could work from anywhere, where is your dream location to work from? If you could post that in the chat, we'll get a good range of answers. So we got Netherlands, the pool is easier. A beach cabana, Jamaica. A cabin in North Carolina, you could get there. That's drivable still. We're getting a few Jamaicas through. Jamaica again, my wife's family is all from Jamaica, so we have big ties to Jamaica. So yeah, I think the general, but I think if we're all in South Florida, we basically are in a pretty good place if we were working remotely. So we're not doing too badly. But thanks for sharing that. So to get on to the topic of today, virtual teams have been growing in importance for the past decade. For decades, it's since companies have been going multinational, since firms have been national, I think everybody to some extent has been involved in virtual teams, whether that's having colleagues that work in other states, in other towns, in other countries. You would have interaction over the phone. But with the whole COVID pandemic, that has just been accelerated. And in my slides, you'll see the boardrooms that we used to know that we'd meet up and run our project calls and do walk the walls and use the whiteboards have now become our computer screens. What we're all looking at now, we're all on WebEx or Microsoft Teams or Zoom. So it has been a really rapid transition, and I'm sure everybody has adapted to that in some way, but I'm sure everybody, especially with projects and running virtual projects, everybody's having their own challenges. So that was the next question I wanted to ask, because I will touch on this in the next few slides. As a project manager, what are the main challenges you are currently facing with virtual teams and projects? And if you could leave it again, if you could go in the chat and leave that would be really appreciated. So Terry wanting to get back to the office. I'm sensing you're an extrovert, Terry, so you get your energy from other people probably. I think a lot of extroverts in my team are wanting to get back to the office face to face. Again, yeah, it just, no matter what you're doing, I think everybody agrees is you just can't replace face to face virtually. It's something that is really struggling. Angel trying to shut off, losing track of time. Yeah, needing to see people in person. It really is a struggle for all of us, and like everybody struggles in different ways. And then when you get to every single member of your project, every project member is going through these same concerns, and you're on some days they're up, some days they're down. It really falls on a project manager to kind of set an example of how can we collaborate in virtual teams. Although we'll never be able to fully replace face-to-face, how can we get there, and what are the tools we can use to kind of start this collaboration and start to fill in some of those things that we get tangibly when we're in the office, but we can't really get them when we're apart. So I see the comments are coming through, so keep going with those and I'll probably catch up with them, but I'm going to move on to my next slide. So this is a bit of a check that this is a famous Bell Laboratories study from years ago. And what it really says, and I think this is one particular that it's small print, and I know I've been having trouble seeing some of the slides, so you might need to expand this. I think this is the only slide in my presentation you will, but you might need to expand it for these purposes to see what's going on. But really what it says, even if you can't see it, is that we have always been working in virtual teams. Even if you were in an office full of people, it will show from figure number 1 shows you if you were in the same corridor as another project team member, your collaboration efficiency is somewhere around 90 to 100%. So you're really collaborative, you're working with them on the projects all the time. You move to number 2, where those 2 team members are on the same floor but in different corridors. That drops like 5-fold. So you're at 20 to 30% efficiency of collaborating, which is really worrying, but we need to just be aware of this. This is basically how humans operate, that if it's not right in front of us and made very convenient, sometimes that collaboration doesn't happen. If you move beyond that, which is number 3, where you are the 2 team members are on different floors or in different buildings or virtual, that drops to like 10 to lower percent that those team members will naturally collaborate between themselves. So this is I mean, it could be worrying, but it's also just to keep aware of that in our projects where I think a lot of projects' success feeds on collaboration of team members and enhancing that and enforcing that. If we as project managers don't kind of step in and facilitate some of those things going on, it may drop away. And particularly as we've moved to the virtual environment, it's just something that we need to constantly keep top of mind. Which is just a restatement of this is a simplification of the previous slide, that if you're next door to somebody, you're likely to communicate with them weekly in the same aisle, rare or communicate weekly, but there is some level of interaction. If you're on a different floor or virtual, there is a slim chance of communicating weekly. Seeing that we are now all in this virtual world, how do we make sure that this comes into our projects and that we get this collaboration going on a somewhat natural thing, but it might need to be prodded on a little bit. Okay. So this leads me into, and before I get into that, I did want to just ask, I'll go back a slide. Is this what everybody is experiencing? Has everybody experienced with virtual teams a drop in collaboration, less communication, more project issues? Or if you haven't, also highlight that, because maybe we'll come back to you for some things. But so Tina's saying you have to draw them in more, which is correct. Is anybody having any other experiences? Using one-on-ones is a great tool. Yeah, so I think this is common to everybody. So I'm going to get into the keys for success. So keys for success, and I will caveat this with there is no rocket science involved in this. It is all stuff that everybody probably to some level already knows, but it is stuff that it's stuff worth thinking about deeply, that how you keep your team members motivated, engaged, how you understand their differences and preferences, and how you be interactive and adaptable. And I think it's something that I constantly strive to improve. And sometimes I'm good at it, and sometimes I let the ball drop on it. And it's something that you can literally inject it in a few days if you want to do it. But if you feel like you can step in there and change a few things starting next Monday when you go back to your projects and your teams, I would say try and think of these things of how can you apply it, and take 1 to 2 things and just try it out and see if it works or see if it doesn't work. So I'm going to start on number 1, which is keep team members motivated and engaged. I'll start with a famous Eisenhower quote, which is, motivation is the art of getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. And I think that we can all relate to that as project managers. So without them knowing it is a good addition to that, Tina. So yes, obviously influence comes into it, and with no malicious intent as well. So team members with low motivation and no clarity of purpose perform poorly. I really think this is key to project management and managing virtual teams as well. It's like, the more you can't really rely on motivation all the time because it goes up and down, but trying to keep your team motivated is definitely a top priority. Clarity of purpose is everything. If the team and the project you're working on do not have clarity of purpose, I guarantee you your team will eventually get unmotivated. You will get unmotivated. Everybody will get unmotivated, and the level of energy will drop and the results will drop. So I really think clarity of purpose is key to that. So I'm gonna go through a few tips that I think, and a few examples of what I've experienced and key learnings. So one of the things I noticed when we went into COVID was, so I work for Next Era Energy now. We work on renewable energy projects. We build wind, solar, battery, and all types of energy projects around the US and Canada. And I had a really high performing team back early in the year, really motivated, performing on really interesting projects. And then COVID hit. So we had been pretty much an office-based team. And I don't know if anybody else noticed this out there, but some of my most motivated and engaged people, after spending 1 to 2 months at home alone, became some of my most unmotivated and unengaged people. Did anybody else experience that in their projects or in their workplace? So I'm getting a few yeses there. And this is something I've experienced previously as well, is that when I was working out in Taiwan, setting up a shared service center for the region. And the project started off really, really well. We were working with 13 different markets, so 13 different countries, basically consolidating that into one place. And everybody was really motivated at the end, but midway through the project, everybody was very unmotivated because we were basically moving a lot of folks to a new country. They didn't see the purpose in doing so. And it was basically pushed down upon them. So this is something to keep in mind, especially in virtual teams, is that even though we're all virtual, it's easy to get together with decision makers and go and push a project, because it's not as easy to get everybody together in a room and start bouncing ideas. But it is so key that all team members feel involved throughout the whole life of the project. So spending that time doing the painful virtual Zoom calls, having many people going around the table, making sure you include everybody, that is just a key thing. It's harder to do when it's virtual teams, but the same logic applies. If you have somebody in a virtual team that feels excluded, they will drag their heels or they'll feel disengaged for the entire project. The other thing to pick up on that is just that usually when you're in an office space scenario, you can probably pick up on these type of things. If somebody's feeling disengaged, you see it in their body language. You see them coming in slightly later. You see them going home slightly earlier, or they're not their bubbly selves. Or there's something you can pick up on it from being around people. In the virtual world, that is much harder to do. You see people on Zoom or you're on conference calls with them. A lot of the times you're just talking about tasks and completing things and you're ticking the boxes. I think this is where creating, like organizing casual discussions outside of project work is really important. There's many ways of doing that. In the office, you would just have it at the water cooler, at a coffee, or just passing people in the corridors. But you have to get a bit creative when you're working with virtual teams. That can be, I know a lot of people do virtual happy hours. That's good to let off steam, but it's also, I think somebody put it in the comments earlier, the emphasis on just having casual one-on-ones with your team and with your project team members is just, it's irreplaceable of just having those 15 to 30-minute check-ins. They can be rolling meetings. They don't have to be scheduled every time, but just constantly checking in on people and seeing what's going on. That's really going to be the difference to keeping the pulse on your team and your projects and letting it slip. One additional point I would also get for specifically for keeping motivation high in virtual teams is just that spending the time early on to clarify what the tasks and processes are, just instead of the goals and roles is the way I would put it, is really key. So it's the same in an office. If you set it up, you would usually, folks know if they have issues, they come up to they come up to you and speak about it or things like that. How do you do that in a virtual world? Some people might do it one way, some people might do it another way. Clarifying for how you think it should work on your project and redefining that. And even on a project that's been running pre going virtual, taking the time, stopping and redefining how that works, I think is a really worthwhile thing to do. Just in general, the thing I really found was, and this is a mistake I made very early in my career that I've tried to correct over the years, that like it gets back to that fact of humans in certain occasions when we're getting the head down and we're getting task focused and delivering on projects, we avoid human connection unless the person's right in front of you and across the corridor. If they're on a different floor and if they're in a different country or if they're virtual, you sometimes don't do that. But pushing yourself outside of the comfort zone, being the project manager that leads by example and has those difficult conversations, that actually de-stresses your team members. So if you're a team member that's feeling disengaged, you don't know what's going on, a lot of cases you won't put up your hand, you'll just sit there, you'll get more stressed. So the more you can have your pulse on everybody that's involved in your project, it's going to be appreciated by everybody. Before I move on to the next topic, I will say, I know this is a non-exhaustive list, but does anybody have any other tips and recommendations that have specifically worked on for keeping high motivation and engagement in the virtual teams? That would be great to share in the chats and see what we've got. Yes, I think these are all good. I think some of them I've started to apply as well, is that like just not talking. One of the things I've started to apply in my project meetings and my team meetings is just the first 5 or 10 minutes is just a sharing session. Nothing about work, is just like what's going on in people's worlds, who's struggling, who's not struggling. And that starts with you. If you don't share and you're not authentic, it is so yeah. So on some occasions I've just shared, hey, my kids have been an absolute disaster yesterday. Me and my wife had a big blow up and we're getting over that. But yeah, that's what happens during lockdown. So if you can do that, I think there's a lot of tools that you can really mindfully get better engagement. changing Zoom backgrounds is a great one as well. Okay, so we're going back to the keys. Number 2 that I'm going to focus on is understanding cultural differences and personal preferences. And for this one, I've put in a quote from Stephen Covey, the expert kind of productivity coach, but what he said was, strength lies in differences, not in similarities. So I think that this is a really relevant one, and this is one, again, I've learned over the years, that when I started out as like a 20-year-old in my 20s as a project manager, traveling around the world, I pretty much thought that the way I was doing things was the right way, and there was only one way to do things, and I was completely wrong, and thankfully I've woken up to that. But there's many different ways to do things, and folks get there in different paths, and that's completely fine. There can be a wrong path as well, and you can redirect, but sometimes you got to let it play out. So what I wanted to go through is probably one of my very first experience of this was when I was in my time in Asia managing projects, and a lot of this was even in the days before Zoom. It was predominantly over conference calls, and I was managing a virtual team to get that stood up in Taiwan. And how that usually played out was I had a big task list of 100 tasks that everybody needed to do, and I was going through it, and we were getting through it, and I was saying, is this done? Yes. Is that done? No. Has anybody got any comments? No. One of the things I didn't get from like Asian culture is that unless you're kind of asked to speak up specifically, or you don't really do it, and you keep respectfully, you don't let people lose face. It's definitely the opposite of what we do in Ireland. I think it's the opposite of what everybody does in the US, right? That if you stand up and you think something's wrong, mainly you voice it, but not every culture is like that. So I learned that by kind of a little bit of mentorship, and also just coming back and things not working out and getting feedback afterwards. So there's cultural differences, but I also think this applies to just personal differences. So the comparison I was going to give everybody was, think about extroverts and introverts. And we all are, to some degree, I mean, it's a spectrum of where you are, but if you work with teams and virtual teams, you're working with a spectrum of not everybody's an extrovert, not everybody's an introvert. It's a mixture. And you have to deal with that. So I am slightly introverted. I come out as ISTJ, but I can be extroverted. I can play both roles, but by default, I am an introvert. How I think about it, the most simplistic way is introverts get their energy from being alone and solitude and recharging their battery, whereas extroverts get their energy from being around other people, having activity going on. So there's no wrong or right in that. It's just this is people's defaults. Sometimes when you move, so use the Asia technology or analogy, that I felt that people weren't speaking up. Was that my problem or their problem? It was my problem because I wasn't aware of that. If I would have been aware of it, I would have found out who was the subject matter experts, started asking them directly and getting feedback, or working on one-on-ones behind the scene to make sure I was more prepped for the call. Same with extroverts and introverts in any setting that we're working in today. Some of the time you may be on a call and the extroverts will be giving you all their opinions, and you'll be getting, it's great, and you're having really good conversations. You think your project's running great. You think but maybe there's an introvert out there that has really good inputs, that would have done it in a physical setting, but now that they're in a virtual team, they're more reserved. They're more inclined to step back and let the team talk. So how can we bring that out in people? And yeah, so everybody plays their role, but I think when we move to virtual teams, project managers just need to be more aware of this. So how can I make sure that everybody is involved in the calls? One of those ways is doing roundtables, right? You don't give audio space, or you don't give FaceTime to just the people who want to talk. You give FaceTime to everybody. You get the inputs of everybody, and maybe some people don't want to have, or maybe sometimes somebody's put on the spot and they come up with a great idea. But the more we can go towards virtually making sure everybody is included and not leaving anybody out, that is key. So one of the things is, like, if certain folks are coming to project calls and they're not speaking, why is that? Dig into it. Do they have something to contribute? Really ask yourself those questions. Then it gets down to, I definitely, one of the things I've experienced in my team and my projects since COVID hit specifically, but I've always experienced it with virtual teams, is just, it's sometimes easier for conflict to arise in virtual situations. So people, you can see the photo of the guy at the computer screen. I think we've all been there at some point, that people send you an email or people send you a message, and you react to it in a different way than you would if somebody would have maybe said it to your face in a more respectful way. So how can we understand these individual preferences and make sure that conflict in a virtual team either stays to a minimum, or if it does come up, we resolve it pretty quickly? And sometimes that involves stepping in, just getting both sides of the story, getting people together, making sure, hey, look, before we went virtually, there was no issue, so why are we having them now? Can we get to the root of the problem? Is there a communication thing happening here? Would it be better for you guys to jump on calls and have face-to-face calls rather than sending emails, or working on Microsoft Teams, or in a interactive way? So that is definitely something I've experienced, and I wanted to ask that to the group as well. Is that something? Do you find that since we went completely virtually, are you experiencing more or less conflict in the workplace? So I think we're getting some more through. I think in general it's what. So we're getting less conflict, but less connected, which is maybe that's just avoiding. But yeah, I mean, it can go both ways. Traditionally, what I've seen is when everybody goes virtual, it's very easy to go back to that. You don't collaborate as effectively when people are dispersed remotely. And virtual, you usually revert to emails or messages just by the very nature of them. I think everybody has received text messages that you're like, what the hell is this? And yeah, you don't have those little tools to just use that you would have day to day in the office to kind of like de-escalate conflict. So sometimes you need to get a bit more hands-on, because everybody knows if you're having conflicts happening in your project, that is a disaster. That's not going to be good. And it's just, one of the best advice I ever got from one of my bosses back in Ireland, she said was, if you ignore a problem, it's the same as not identifying it. And I think that really relates to conflict. If you ignore conflict that's going on in your projects and you just say, well, it'll be fine, it probably won't be. So taking that time, stopping, trying to resolve it. You might not even resolve it, but at least you tried. But I think that is one thing to be very wary of during virtual teams. Is there any place you can smooth out issues? And the last point I wanted to make on that is just, although I put out understand differences and preferences, understanding them is great, but really the two words I bolded in my slide are what we really want to get to, is be open to people who are different to you. You are just naturally biased there's a subconscious bias within all of us to like people who are like ourselves. So we will go and we will even in hiring, you're more likely to hire people that are like yourself. You're more likely to pick project members that are like yourself. You're more likely to go to people that are more like yourself, that you want to resolve issues. That is dangerous. Sometimes you miss perspectives. Sometimes you miss better ways of doing things. So if you're an introvert and you don't really want to go to the most extroverted people in the world, challenge your thinking. If you're an extrovert and you're not seeing the value of introverts, challenge that thinking. If there's people that are highly analytical or people who are very salesy that turns you off, well, challenge your thinking and say, well, maybe what can they bring to the table? How can they solve some issues? How can they solve some issues better? That's what I want to leave you with, is just use the full capacity in your toolkit. And even though it's virtual, this might be a good opportunity to tap into that. Okay, so moving on to the last one, which is be interactive and adaptable. And this quote comes from Bill Gates, which is the best leaders, I think it says the best leaders and teachers are very interactive. So the question I wanted to ask everybody before we got into this, my last slide, is, does everybody, who is currently overwhelmed by technology, or does anybody think they're using technology perfectly? So I'm referring to, I know in the company I'm working for right now, you can use multiple things: WebEx, Teams, email, text, calls. You can probably use Zoom. How is that going for everybody? Are you overwhelmed, or you think technology is working for you? So I think we're getting the guys that are techies responding. But I will give you the example I experienced in my team. So this has happened on a few occasions. This has happened when I worked for a telecoms company when we were rolling out networks in Papua New Guinea in remote places. And it's also to some extent happening with my team since we went into COVID. So I've had project teams that are of various different backgrounds and really wide age range. So from early adapters in their 20s to folks that are closer to in 50s and 60s that are more used to doing certain things. So when I worked at the telco, the boss at the time there was, what you actually had to do was you made up a PowerPoint slide, you got it perfectly done, then you printed out the PowerPoint slide and you faxed it over to him in Ireland so he could read it in black and white. And on the flip side of that, we were rolling out a 5G network to the location to bring the biggest technology in the world towards. So there was a big range gap, and what it really drove us towards, and this is similar to what we've experienced in my team since we went into COVID and being completely remote, is we have so many tools available to us. We have so many channels that sometimes it can get confusing for how you want to run your projects, how you want to run your communication, if there's a consistent way. I think with virtual teams, the advice here is definitely slow down. The first thing to do is just slow down before you speed up, is take the time, define what tools work best for you, set the expectations, and what processes are you going to run your projects. Are you just going to use Teams, or are you going to use Asana, or whatever the technology or the workflow technology you use? Are you going to use emails? Are emails obsolete now? Are we going to use weekly calls? The more you can define how you're going to operate on a weekly basis, it's going to let your virtual team know what's consistent and what's expected of them. And I think that's what's key, is just creating an environment for all team members to be comfortable in. And that can be different settings, but it's getting everybody's input of, not just picking the latest technology because it's the coolest thing and you think it's the coolest thing to use. Is everybody comfortable with that? Is everybody fully trained on it? Does everybody know the full capabilities of that? And taking that time and getting it really set up, I think, is key. And then it just comes back. Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to get at, Angel, is it's a tech overload. It's like, what's the difference between Teams and emails? Should I be sending emails anymore? When do I send emails? When do I call you? Should I set up a Microsoft Teams call? It's just very confusing, and the more confusion that comes in leads more people to, well, like, I just won't contact you at all. So if you can define clear channels of communication and staying on touch of the on top of those, that's just going to enable your virtual team to work far better. So I would ask everybody on the call that's listening to think for a minute, how are you currently running your projects? Is it effective? Is the technology working for you? It's just a tool. Is it being interactive, or is it giving you those channels of having those casual conversations? Is it too task focused? Is there any one change you could make on Monday that would make it more interactive for your virtual team, that folks would feel more engaged and more motivated and just show up better every day? And if there's anything that you can bring to that, I think it would be great. So the last few things I want to go through are, I think everybody's aware, virtual collaboration and teams are here to stay. The pandemic will pass. This time will pass and we'll all go back to our offices. But I think everybody's aware, whether it's folks working from home more often, companies getting more global and national, it is here to stay. So what are the small little things that you can trial and error with your own team and projects to get more collaboration happening in your virtual team? Be more mindful of the people that are involved. Is everybody engaged? Is everybody motivated? Is everybody showing up to the table with ideas and making decisions in the spirit of the team and the spirit of the project? And I think the main thing is, as project managers, we are the folks that are in a position to set the example. How can we be the change we want to see? How can we be more collaborative? How can we use the technology for us? How can we set an example for everybody else of dealing with difficult conversations, dealing with conflict when it first arises, even though it's virtual? How can we do that? Because that's gonna cascade down our teams and down to our projects, and it's gonna let us have better outcomes. I'm pretty sure I'm getting to the end of my presentation here. So if I just recap, these are what, from my learnings over the years, from working on all the international projects, through failure and learnings, I definitely think that the three things to keep top of mind when you're dealing with virtual teams are: keep team members motivated, engaged in whatever way you can; understand differences and preferences, number two, and respect them and be open to the differences. And number three is just be interactive and adaptable. Don't get tied to technology. Don't get set in your ways. Be adaptable to the team for whatever works to give you a better project delivery. And they are my main points today. I will say, again, that is a non-exhaustive list, all the other key things that usually pop in. And I did want to finish by asking you guys, is there anything you would add to that list that has been very helpful for you? And I know we're getting to like after 4 p.m. on a Friday evening, everybody's probably very close to their weekends, but I really appreciate everybody staying tuned and being interactive. So are there any things you would add to those lists as really important, and tips that you would recommend to folks to use in a virtual team? So I'm just going to, Carola, I don't know if you come in and manage Q&A, but I'll get into the Q&A now.
Hi, Cormac. Yeah, do you see the question posted by, I think, Ardalis Diaz?
I do. So Adelis's question for everybody who is not reading the chat is a really good question. It's, you mentioned bringing in people that are different into the project, not like-minded people. What is your thought process to overcome any bias with including people that may pose objections? My thought process on that is I absolutely love people who bring objections. If I think, I mean, there's many great leaders that surround themselves with great people, but I think Abraham Lincoln is one of the best examples that he surrounded himself with people who were not like-minded, and he specifically picked people that were going to challenge him. And I think that's key for making good decisions. You need, in a respectful way, you want people who are not just in there to mess everything up and be ruffle feathers, but you want to, in any way that you can encourage like constructive feedback, constructive criticism, I think that's the way you get better outcomes. So absolutely love people who have objections. I think listening to those objections, not being defensive about them, that's something you have to learn as well. It's something that I was definitely defensive in my early days. I still am slightly defensive, as my wife will tell any of you, but it's something I've tried to get better at. And I would actively seek out people who are going to think differently. I think that's, and in one tool that may be useful at Dallas is that if you feel like you have a group of like-minded people, and sometimes that's just going to naturally happen, I would always ask somebody to come to the meeting and play devil's advocate. So, hey, we're all thinking this way. Your job this week is to come and challenge that thinking. Like, don't accept what we say, challenge the thinking, think differently about it, play devil's advocate. I think that's a really useful resource you can bring into a virtual team of giving somebody a different role of not just being a yes person, critically thinking about what you guys are doing, if it's the right thing to do for the company, if it's the right thing to do for the project and the team.
Another question here that says, would you say that the fear of the unknown is the biggest influence of non-engagement? Would you say that the fear of the unknown is the biggest infiltrator of the disease of non-engagement?
I love that question. whoever paused that should be it. Like, should think about writing novels. I mean, I think people do not like change. People are just everybody, right? It's fear is a big driver of non-communication. It's like, and a lot of the time, I think it's like, why are people scared of? I think the number one fear in the world is public speaking, and I think everybody to a certain extent has overcome that, right? I was very scared of public speaking the first time I gave my thing, but I've started to deal with that. But what you really fear is judgment. So you don't want other people judging you. That holds people back giving their opinions. So you might have people who you might have people who have great ideas, but their heart is pounding. They want to say it, but they just can't get it out because they've got a fear of being judged. The more you can play that role of being a facilitator, giving psychological safety. Hey, nobody's going to be put down for anything that they say in this thing. The more you can play that thing of making it a safe environment for people to speak up, and in some cases prod people a little bit, say like, hey, I know, like, reach out to them beforehand. If you know any introverts with great ideas, reach out to them and say, hey, I'm going to be looking for ideas off you in this session, so don't be surprised if I call your name out. That will just help them come over that fear. And I think everybody, except for the most extreme introverts, everybody's come over that fear from a certain extent. So the more we can help people do that, the more you get better outcomes. I'm going to go back through here. I think Terry had a question. Carl, are you going to read that one?
Our virtual team managed consistently across global organizations headquartered in. So basically, does a company in Japan view the management of virtual teams the same as a US company?
I would say the answer to that is no. I think it's very important to, if you're working on a global scale, there are big cultural differences. I think with, I don't want to, you just have to, everywhere I've worked, number one thing I've done before is spend time getting to understand that culture, because it's going to let you run your projects better. And if you don't spend that time, you're always going to be like a little bit of an outsider, and you're not going to know how to get stuff done. So my example in Asia is that whole thing of saving face and people not speaking up, that you really need to spend time and build relationships with people offline before you can get it out of them in project meetings. If you, it can be anywhere. I think projects I've ran in India, there's a very, very much everybody will, if you go through a project call, people will say, yes, yes, yes. Are you going to do that? Yes, yes. You'll show up 2 weeks later and nobody will have done anything. And they're like, well, we can't do that because we didn't have the resourcing. So understanding just cultural differences is key. So yeah, I would say virtual teams are run, whatever country you're in, they're run differently. And I would say a big mistake of multinational firms, whether it's a US firm or whether it's a European, is going into different countries and expecting the way we do stuff in our country is the best way to do things. That's the same of being, it's just, you got to be wary of people get things done differently in different ways, and different cultures do things in different ways. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you'll learn things from that. So just constantly being open to it is my advice.
So we have another question by Angel Rivera. After the pandemic is over, do you foresee more organizations going to virtual offices than actual offices?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that I've been following closely, any research that like McKinsey or Gartner or anyone is putting out, the answer to that is, I think, yes. Things are going to, virtual teams are going to be something that is with us for a while. And I think even when we roll back post-pandemic, we're still going to be in a world where half the team might have a vaccination and half the team might not. So the unvaccinated may need to stay virtual. I think in general, I know companies that I've worked with closely, they're asking questions like, what have we learned from COVID? Does this let us go to virtual? Does it let us offshore some stuff? I think the nature of a virtual team is going to be more prevalent than it was before. I do think that organizations are also realizing the value of in-person. So in getting people together in a room and face-to-face interaction is irreplaceable. I don't think that's I think that's something that I don't think that's anything that's ever going to be fully replaced. So it's just, where can you go virtual, and where is it spent better time sticking together? That's what companies got to figure out for themselves. I know one thing I definitely did with my virtual teams when I was in a non-COVID world was, if we had a virtual team that we were about to start a virtual project, the very first thing we did was fly everybody around the world and get us together for a face-to-face straight away. Because that just builds relationships, and it builds times, and it builds similarities quicker than any virtual event can ever do.
Okay, great. I see we have a few comments. Hans is saying, I believe it will go on for quite a while. Companies are finding out it works well. Companies will downsize their office space. Any final comments, Cormac?
No, my final comments are, I hope everybody enjoyed the session. I definitely did. I would love to be with everyone in face-to-face and interacting a bit more. But Tina has given me great job, mate, for my Irish things. But I hope everybody, what I really wanted out of today was just to meet other people. So everybody, if you enjoyed it, or if you just want to reach out, please connect with me on LinkedIn or at the tables. And I hope everybody just got one or two things that they can think about a bit differently. And I would really like it that if you go in on Monday morning, try a few things that you thought about in the session. See if they work a little bit better. See if you can get a little bit more team and project engagement. And if one or two folks do that, it's going to be a very successful result. So thanks a lot. And Carola, thanks a lot for facilitating, like helping me along this. I really appreciate it. And thank you to PMI for putting this on.
Thank you too. So I just, everyone, yeah, thank you, Cormac. I want to remind everyone that we're all headed back to the main session for the closing. So I'm going to end the session right now. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Bye.